Good morning, everyone. I guess I should be on stage here. Have you tried the avocado toast? I love District Winery usually at night, but the only thing that will get me here in the morning is the avocado toast. For those of you who don't know, I'm Steve Clemens. I'm editor-at-large of the National Interest. I'm CEO of Widehall, and we're very pleased to partner with the Association of American Railroads in having a conversation this morning with all of you about the broad transportation picture, innovation, and something that's one of my favorite topics, which I know hopefully won't put you, is like regulatory stuckness, if you will. Like how in so many areas when you look at the country, we have a hard time beginning to look at how do you shift regulatory adjustments to deal with where we are today. We're going to have an interesting and consequential conversation about that this morning. There are a lot of different dimensions of this. We've got technological questions, economic competitiveness. We've got workforce. I just met this gentleman here. He told me he's been in the industry 33 years. So I look forward to your thoughts as well. So great to have you all. I like to run these as conversations with all of you. I get to have a little bit of a chat with some folks up here, but we want to kind of build this in with you as well. And the way we're going to do this, I don't know. I haven't talked to my team, but this is kind of like, Steve's show, right, Narika? Okay, so this is my show. So welcome. Here's Steve. We were actually at a place in New York the other night, and it was Johnny Carson's Hangout in New York, and it was also the Saturday Night Live after-hours place where people went called the Pebble Bar, and we just had it was a great vibe, and this reminds me a little of that space. But with me this morning to help start the show, we have our host, but he's also a really important member of the content of this discussion, but Ian Jefferies, President and CEO of the Association of American Railroads. So let's welcome Ian. Thank you so much. All right, I'm going to be in this chair. I'm longer and bigger, so it just...
Can I lay down? Or?
No, I did do this with Richard Branson once. He was on the stage with me, and I said, Richard, welcome to my first class. And he kicked off his shoes, and he laid down on the couch, and a Gannett photographer caught his shoe in the air, and it was just like an iconic photo. So you're welcome to do the same.
Okay, we'll give it a shot.
Yeah, but Ian, let me just start out and ask you just point blank, and kind of look at the world that you're in. And I want to congratulate you because I think you're in your 8th year now as president of the Association of American Railroads. And as you kind of look at your membership, I'm interested, when you think about 8 years ago, and people have a hard time doing this because they think all the technology we have today, we've had all that time. But when you look at real advances in automation, real advances in what AI is, the generative AI is doing to us, when you look at, systems, complex systems, data coming on board, how has the world changed from when you came on board as president of AAR to this moment?
That's a great question. Matter of fact, I was listening to CNBC as I was driving over here this morning, and someone was making the point that in 1999, social media didn't exist, and it is now a $3 trillion industry. And really talking about that in the sense of AI, and that 10 years from now, there are going to be companies with market caps we can't believe that we haven't even contemplated today. And so when I think back to when I took the helm at the AAR, this was pre-pandemic. I think the first time you and I talked was in 2020, kind of during peak pandemic times.
Right.
And so what I've seen, at least event-wise, so 2020 we had a pandemic.
Well, let me just stop you there. When we talked, when I was at the Hill, I was editor-at-large of the Hill, we had that conversation, and we did these really great remote conversations during that period of time. This country had a heart attack over, moving things, and
right.
rail surged. I mean, I just want to be honest. For a lot of people, rail was not at the forefront of what they thought about America's transportation infrastructure. That changed, rail and trucking.
100%.
Yeah.
And that part of the reason is, so that's for the good. We continued to move things 24/7 throughout the pandemic when a lot of industries and businesses were shut down, but communities and individuals needed critical goods that we supply. We kept things moving, thanks to our employees, thanks to our companies. But then that rolled into what were kind of nationally recognized supply chain challenges. And so we had to navigate that front when volumes snapped back at us. And so it really opened, I think, the nation's eyes to the criticality of what we do, but also put a spotlight on us that requires us to operate at a level that, cannot be, we can't let up. We can't have hiccups. And so we've got to apply lessons learned. And we are a legacy industry. Matter of fact, next year when America celebrates its 250th anniversary, the rail industry is going to celebrate its 200th anniversary.
I know we've all been watching The Gilded Age and George Russell,
okay.
And has that been good for your industry, George Russell?
I don't know that it's had much of an impact either way, but for us though, that means we have been kind of under a regulatory regime that's been developed literally over hundreds of years. And we're today operating with regulations that have been around since the steam engine era, operations that were written in 1970. And as you just reflected on, the industry's continued to innovate and evolve. We're steel on steel. We're always going to be steel on steel, but everything around it and how we do things, technology has continued to evolve. And what we have seen, and we're by no means the only industry that faces this, is that the regulatory and legislative process is a really hard time keeping up with the pace of innovation in industry.
So can you describe for people, when you just said steel on steel, so I hadn't really thought about that framing. And I also know that in your membership, you're not only moving cargo, which is an enormous part of this, you move people, you've got all the, the different dimensions of this rail. I mean, I guess, if you were to paint the system you have, if you were to push reset, sometimes we talk about, the best way to know a system is zero-based budgeting and kind of start out. How would you reinvent our system today in terms of what transportation system would you like to see and have versus where we're at now? That helps us understand the regulatory obligations, if you will.
So I think so much of how we're governed by the rules and regulations that we have to operate by are kind of fixed inputs. And what I would really like to see is a system that allows for outcomes. In other words, this industry, as I mentioned, so 50 years ago, we may have done a lot of things with manual mechanics, manual inspections. Well, technology has taken over a lot of those roles, or at least can play a part in a lot of those roles. And so our big push is let's have a regulatory structure that focuses on outcomes. So tell me where you want us to go, and let us figure out the best way to get there, and also let us continue to evolve how we're getting there. But as long as we're achieving or exceeding the desired regulatory result, then that should be the goal. And let's do that by data. Let's do that by objective analytics. And so if we were to reset the industry today, so much of it would be based on the rules and regulations that we're governed by and a flexibility therein that allows us to continue to evolve so that there's an incentive to continue to invest in safety advancing, efficiency advancing, capacity advancing tactics.
What's your North Star, Ian, when it comes to workforce and thinking about modernization, technology coming on, and how you look at workforce where they're at, workforce where they need to be, looking at upskilling? How do you sew that together? So much of your industry is unionized.
Right.
How do you web that together so it's not, it feels less like a zero-sum challenge and more of a together challenge?
And it should not be a zero-sum challenge. And so when you look at our workforce, we have what is operating in an inherently risky industry, right? It is big, heavy machinery, and our safety record is second to none when it comes to peer industries. And that's a reflection on the commitment to safety that our employees have, the strong safety culture, and the value of the roles they bring to the workplace. As time goes by, those roles need the ability to evolve, because we've seen from the new generation of employees, they don't necessarily have a desire to have the same roles that maybe their parents or grandparents did. This is an outdoor sport. It's a very heavy industry. It's a very challenging industry. And if there are tools we can provide to provide a better work experience, a less rigorous, physically demanding work experience, or a better work-life balance, we need to be working closely with our employees and our unions to evolve that. And some of that will require changing roles. And so I mentioned the role technology can play, for example, in the inspection regime. So much is done manually now. We have technology that can do such a more advanced job in different types of inspections. And that means that our employees are letting the technology does what it does best, where it does best. There are certain things humans just inherently do better. Focus on that, and also focus on fixing areas technology identifies that need to be addressed.
Are your best friends railway folks? Is that who you hang out with?
I mean, we are known to run in a pack in DC.
Do you ever hang out with the highway folks or the, I don't know, airplane folks, the boat folks? I mean, other elements. I mean, I'm just interested if you kind of get out of your zone and meet other people in the transportation world.
So I will say one thing I've really focused on in my role as CEO of the AAR is working in tandem and in concert with a lot of the other modes. And so historically, people think rails and trucks hate each other and we fight. And maybe historically in DC we did.
You get along, so we can say that you get along with trucks.
100%.
Okay.
I love trucks. We
That
work
may be
on
the
a lot of
most
things
tweetable
together.
moment yet,
So,
but so when you look broadly at transportation, I'm interested in how the sector, I mean, to the degree that you can speak to how this crowd looks at the sector, and you look at innovation. I'm looking at Rob Atkinson right now, and I mean, until Rob's going to be up here. Rob, I've known for years and years and years. He's been the biggest advocate for embrace of technology and kind of moving this faster and quicker. How does your industry look at? Are they kicking and screaming through? I was going to ask Rob, when did we become so tech sketchy, skeptical to some degree? In some ways. And I'm interested in how your industry looks at tech and whether they think you need to have a kind of reset and overhaul on the regulatory side.
So to answer your last question first, yes, we need a reset and an overhaul, but that's a big enchilada. And given that we're such a safety sensitive industry, there's an inherent cautiousness to adopting new ways of doing things versus the old way, because the old way works pretty darn good. But if the data determines there's a better way to do things, we should 100% go down that road. And so for us, there needs to be a real strong proving ground, pilot programs, et cetera, that allow you to try out new ways, build data sets. If the data demonstrates objectively that the new way is a better way, there should be a predictable, certainty-filled way that allows you to dovetail that into meeting your regulatory requirement. And the regulatory process is meant to be slow and arduous and frustrating, frankly. And that can be good when you're trying to stop something, frankly, but it can be a real challenge when you're trying to move the ball forward.
So, we didn't coordinate on this stuff at all, but I just, the thought occurs to me that in this country, we've seen rail disasters in our history, some pretty tough ones. Would technology have mitigated some of these? Would modernization, would investment, would infrastructure investment have mitigated some of the worst nightmares we've seen in some rail disasters?
So when you look at the safety record of this industry, there's been dramatic safety improvements, especially over the last several decades, across the board with all types of incidents. And a lot of that's due to partial economic deregulation that occurred about 4 decades ago that's resulted in the ability for railroads to invest their own capital. We invest about $25 billion of our own capital every year back into our network. And so a well-maintained railroad is a safe railroad inherently. But overlaying technology that can continuously monitor the various aspects of the railroads, that can overtake if, for example, positive train control, if a rule's broken by a train, it'll shut the train down, stop it. That overlaying with our highly skilled and highly trained and highly committed workforce, like that's the magic combination that's going to allow us to continue to reach new highs and levels of safety,
so
which
I'm
we
gonna
are
ask
hitting.
Totally unfair questions now, and you're going to.
Oh, great. Okay, here we go.
Have you been to Tokyo lately?
I have
or
not.
Shanghai?
No.
So I have been to Tokyo lately. I've been to Seoul.
Is that an invitation?
No, you're welcome to go with me. We can go on like a transportation kind of global trip. I've been to Shanghai. Their trains are so smooth. You can do cell phone calls in the worst hills. In Soule is a really hilly place, and you're kind of going through everything. And I can't believe how clear my and so you get a sense that wow, there's just something remarkably different about the infrastructure, the investment, the technology in some of these places. I was on the sorry, Amtrak, if Amtrak's in the room. I was on the whatever the high end Acela, the new Acela, broke down 10 times on one trip the other night, $500 ticket. And, I'd said, I'm getting off. I got off in Wilmington and got a car. So in this space, is it wrong to look at Seoul and Japan and Shanghai and other transportation systems that just seem to be at a different tech level as a goal for this country?
So I think it's important to put that into context. So one, let's break it up between passenger and freight. So hands down, the U.S. has the most advanced, admirable freight rail system in the world. We're the envy of the world when it comes to moving freight.
We're kicking their tail on those fronts. Okay.
On the passenger side, you're right. We are way behind. But why is that? It is because in some of these countries you point out, the public has made a decision to put hundreds of billions of dollars of investment into passenger rail. If you look at the entire funding that, for example, Amtrak's gotten over the 50-ish years it's been around, it pales to maybe 1 year of highway funding. And so Our society is focused on investing into highways, things along those lines. Other countries, other societies have focused on investing into passenger rail. And until you see that level of public commitment in the U.S., it's going to be really hard to make those advances.
I would tell our friends at Amtrak, I would love to publish that op-ed because I didn't know that. I mean, I think it's one of those things that people don't understand how the spending investment across different platforms, comes in. But, our interface with a major transportation mode, particularly Northeast Corridor, is one of these ones that is part of this story that we need to figure out as we're thinking about looking at how you invest in the system. Passenger side of it, but walk us through a little bit, Ian, in a more tangible way. Tell us some stories of what might be improved vis-a-vis technology and evolving to absorb that into the system. What could we do better?
Sure. I will say that there's dramatic investment occurring on the NEC, so I think that traveling experience is going to continue to get better as years go by.
I'm so excited about that.
There we go.
Yeah.
So technologically wise, so much of what we're talking about comes down to inspection regimes. And so whether it's track inspection, whether it's locomotive inspection, whether it's signal inspection. So that was all built at a time when doing things manually, walking out, looking at it with the human eye was the best way to do it. In certain circumstances, that is still the best way to do it. However, for example, looking at signal inspection, so signals at crossings, gates go up and down, let you know. So there are specific time intervals where those have to be inspected. However, many of these signal systems are now remotely monitored 24/7. And so the health of that system at all times. And so requiring manual intervals for coming out and looking at it doesn't make a lot of sense to us. Another one, track inspection. Again, certain frequencies required for individuals to walk the track and inspect it with the naked eye. Well, we have technology that you can affix to a train and revenue service that can do continuous monitoring and inspection of the track while you're operating the train. So that's twofold advantage. One, you're not taking that segment of track out of revenue service. You're not shutting it down. And two, you're not putting employees out on the track in a risky situation. Slips, trips, falls, et cetera, are the number one cause of injury for our employees. So if you can take them out of that and have technology helping you inspect and then pinpointing where there might be issues, then the employee comes back in, inspects it, makes a repair as needed. As I mentioned, there are areas where the manual inspection is going to be more effective than technology. It's that right combination.
How much of a nightmare was Sebastian Junger's book about walking 400 miles on the rail?
I mean, that was like the ultimate trespassing.
Does anybody read that book? I forgot what it's called. Did you read the Sebastian Junger book? You kind of decided to walk 400 miles along a rail track from like this area up to.
We would not advise that.
What's that?
We would not advise.
No, there's
that,
like serious, serious issues
very
where the railway folks were constantly trying to get him off the tracks. It's sort of an interesting thing, but he's a big name, so I just wondered if that was something.
Unfortunately, that's like the leading cause of death.
I'd love to take a couple of questions in a moment, but we're going to have Senator Deb Fischer and Congressman Bruce Westerman up here in a bit. What do you most need Congress to think about in this space of modernization? What do they need? I mean, if you're talking to them and we were having a dinner salon and saying, hey, we're sort of stuck in 1970s gridlock on some stuff, and we've got to get out of this gridlock. What would be the top 2 or 3 things you would tell this government that you really need to see?
So here's the 3 things that come to mind. One, I mentioned kind of pilot programs, proving grounds. You need robust legislation that allows for objective evaluation, data development, and determination as to whether a new way of doing things is better and how you can roll that into an existing regulatory requirement. 2, we really need to establish regulations. This is forward-looking, outcomes-based regulations. Tell me where you want to go and allow me to continually determine the best way to get there. And if I'm hitting or achieving the results you're requiring, we should all be happy with that outcome. And 3, I think we really need mode-neutral technology policy. In other words, every mode ought to be operating on the same playing field. We're about to have driverless trucks zipping around the interstates of Texas. We have Waymo dropping people off at the wrong gates at San Francisco Airport. And yet we who operate on a fixed guideway are really being hamstrung in our ability to automate. And when you look at the advantages and frankly the simplicity and the significant less interaction with the traveling public, we should absolutely be on the tip of the spear of where folks want to be deploying said technology. So it's a big lift, but I think there's a lot of folks who are interested in moving the ball forward, and it's something that all stakeholders ought to get behind.
I was in New York during the UN General Assembly when you've got every head of state in town, and traffic was a gridlock, and I just felt so sorry for those stuck Waymos. They were just
very
just
confused.
sitting there, there were little circles going on there. They were not moving, and there were people inside. I mean, I think it would have been worth it just to sort of have that experience. But I don't know what's happening inside a Waymo when you're stuck in gridlock for an hour. But let's take any question here. We got any thoughts, questions, reactions to Ian real quickly.
Everybody agrees with everything I said.
Well, then I'm going to pick someone. Who do I want to say? I'm going to go to this gentleman right here. You've got a comment. Yeah.
This is Ken Phelan with Storm Center Communications. We're a geospatial mapping technology company. So when you refer to technology innovations, when it comes to safety, inspections, transportation, what innovations more than likely will complement what you're doing to make the railroads and the tracks more safer?
Mm-hmm.
It's a great question.
Yeah. So a couple of different things. I think it's all kind of, we're moving as a world into the world of sensors and continuous monitoring, and so there's kind of a twofold advantage there. So one, you're constantly getting feedback on the health of the asset that's being monitored. And so you can get a much earlier detection of if there's a problem. Two, when it comes to GPS in particular and real-time monitoring of, for example, train location, et cetera, we're way behind on customer visibility. And so, you order a pizza, when they put the freaking pepperoni on it before it comes to your house. We've got a lot of room to grow there to better compete with other modes. There is really great technology out there for continuous monitoring of not only asset health, but asset location, et cetera. And so I think we're kind of at the tip of the spear when it comes to the opportunities out there.
It's a great question, but it makes me think about tracking things, tracking systems, blockchain being able to kind of diffuse this in a way where you've got a vast set of tools to begin monitoring things. I was just reading about your industry, and one dimension that's not often discussed is the extraordinary theft of cargo in your arena. How can that be today? I mean, and what's going on that front?
So I would just say across the entire supply chain, cargo theft is becoming a bigger and bigger issue because it is not petty crime. It is being coordinated by what are very sophisticated transnational criminal networks. And so that's at the warehouse, that's at the port, that's in the trucking industry, and that's at the rail industry. And what we're seeing across the supply chain is literally billions of dollars of goods stolen a year.
I mean, security is really high on this
Very
administration's radar screen. How can this be? What are you talking? What is the administration? What are the law enforcement crowd doing in this, and what tools do you need?
So a big piece of this has been a lack of federal engagement historically because it is seen or has been seen as more of a state or local issue, and state and local law enforcement just don't have the capacity or the wherewithal to really go after the head of the snake on this stuff. The feds do, and what we're talking about is interstate commerce, so there's a natural fit for the federal government. I will say that House, Senate, and the administration are very much more engaged. We've got bipartisan legislation in the House and Senate. The White House has gotten involved for really federal coordination, federal resources for enforcement. It's not, we arrest people all the time. They just don't get prosecuted. I had a railroad arrest somebody 17 times and they never got prosecuted. So unless there's actual penalties with real teeth, we're not going to be able to drive a wedge into this and start to bend the curve back down.
Well, thank you for this. Thanks, Ian, for helping us launch, understand what the state of play is. And I got to tell you, there's so many sectors, and I'm going to talk to our next panel in just a moment, where if you kind of look at the regulatory realities of industries. I've been looking at pharmaceuticals, for instance, one area where it was the in their case, it was 1930s. In your case, maybe you had a big jump in the 1970s. But it seems that we're behind in a lot of regulatory catch up in this area.
I think so.
Particularly as technologies come on. So thank you so much.
Thank you. You've got a great panel.
Let's give it Ian Jefferies, President of the Association of American Railroads.
Great.
Thank you for my avocado toast, too.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Now let me welcome to the stage, I've got a great panel here, Susan Dudley. She's founder and senior scholar at George Washington Regulatory Studies Center at GW University, and she's a distinguished professor of practice at the Trachtenberg School of Public Policy. I just have to tell you, she is really into regulatory talk, and I want to get into that because it reminds me of my UCLA class on the subject. And we have Matt Soule, who's co-founder and CEO of Parallel, which we're going to hear a lot about. He's visiting from Los Angeles, so it's like 5 a.m. for you. So thanks, Matt, for being here. And of course, Rob Atkinson, the founder and president of the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation. And in my view, Rob is one of the, kind of most significant high-level voices about technology in all of its forms in a lot of areas. But he's been one of the great leaders in digital, but has been someone out there. And I just want to start out, Rob. Thanks for
certainly the tallest.
What's that?
I'm certainly the tallest.
Exactly, the tallest. Yeah, I'm a little jealous. I'm just an inch down from you. But I just want to start out, and sort of look at this question, right? Why? I was going to ask this to Ian Jefferies, but I mean, part of the question is, water is supposed to run downhill. And sometimes it's so hard to get it to do that in this town that when you're looking at the advent of new and promising technologies that have delivered, I can't think of major technologies that haven't, moved us in better ways, from the iPhone to digital opportunity to things that have made us smarter and better. And that leads to, concerns, but it also leads to progress and opportunity. And I'm interested in why, in the history of this, you think we've kind of have a techno-skepticism built in so deeply in this town.
Yeah, so I've written pretty extensively about that. Really, the U.S. took a turn for the worse in the late 60s and 70s. And that's really for our whole history, really all the way from the founding of the Republic up until then. The U.S. became the world leader. I don't want to say the only reason, but a principal reason is we were willing to take risks, and we always saw technology as something that was good. I mean, you were mocked. If you were sort of even skeptical of technology through the 50s and 60s, up until then, if you were even skeptical of it, you were mocked by the elite class. You were a tinfoil hat wacko. You didn't get behind progress. It's the exact opposite now. So if you want to get a really good TED Talk, you don't go, hey, this technology is pretty good and it's making our lives better. Like, who cares? But if you say, this technology is destroying our human soul. I was at one of the Kennedys had a big salon, a big thing up in Hyannisport, and they asked me to, and there was a woman up there.
Which Kennedy kind of matters?
A woman. That's all I know.
Okay.
There's so many of them. And there's a woman up there on the panel who said, well, Google Maps causes Alzheimer's. I get back to DC, I emailed the Alzheimer's Association. You guys ever heard of that? Like, no, of course not. So I think that's the problem. The other two challenges are what you've seen is this sort of emerging, again, elite consensus in Washington that these technologies are fundamentally too disruptive. And it's kind of this weird thing. It's like, geez, if it wasn't for disruptive technology, we wouldn't have had Trump. And goddamn, we got Trump. It was all this disruptive technology. It had nothing to do with why people voted in majority for President Trump. It had nothing to do with that.
So just to jump in here, one more notch in this, when I got to know you well when I was in New America Foundation, 1999. The internet, the IT revolution was upon us. Broadband was becoming a big deal. I'm good friends with Steve Case. We finally got rid of all those kind of sign up, dial-in discs of AOL, and we were going to have online all the time connectivity. And I remember the New America Foundation got $1 million from the Markle Foundation to try to describe for the railroad industry, for lawyers, for chefs, how their worlds were going to change from broadband. And we were to be the focus groups and conceptualizers of this. And honestly, I don't think we impacted at all because it came like a tsunami and everyone changed their patterns. I feel like we're in that moment again where we don't realize how significantly the tech tsunami is, and it's going to be there and move. But do you feel like there are a lot of similarities today in 2025, 26 with 1999?
Yeah, I think one of them is we're probably going to have a few AI companies that lose. I think there's overinvestment, which is fine. We had overinvestment. Irrational exuberance is ultimately good. It just means that some people will lose. But I think one of the things Ian
I mean,
pointed
there
out-
was irrational exuberance in the 1880s in railways.
in rail.
And that helped a lot, right? So
We overinvested in
Yeah.
rail, but
Yeah.
we then, as Ian said, we have the best freight rail system in the world because we overinvested. So I think Ian made this point, and I think a lot of people don't fully understand it because most people sort of experience with this technology is their phone. It's not just sort of the fact that Moore's law has improved and we got 5G. It's this entire array of technologies that allow us in the cyber physical world that people don't see these technologies. If you see them in your car now, that's where you see them. But the reason rail can do this isn't just because they have satellite connectivity to connect. It isn't because just of AI. It's because they have cyber physical systems.
Right.
They have these sensors. The sensors with vision, the sensors with weight, sensors with temperature. And that whole world is way better than it was even 5 years ago.
Right.
And Washington sort of still hasn't caught up with that. And Susan can address this, but regulators tend to not want to make type 2 errors.
I never can remember which is
I
one
can
and two,
never
but-
remember.
but we know what you mean.
Yeah, it's the error where
Yeah.
something bad happens as opposed to the error where you don't let something good happen.
right.
Regulators are way too risk averse in that regard now because we're in a technology transformation. So it's better to just be sort of not go too fast because you don't
Right.
get fired. But you don't get fired for not going fast.
Right.
And you look at other countries, China being the case
Yeah.
in point. I mean, man, the pedal is to the metal, to use a car analogy there, and we have to speed up, and not in a sort of reckless, stupid way, but there's lots of things we could do that would make
Because
it
get
easier.
back to my comments to Ian about being in Tokyo, Seoul, and Shanghai. I know you have been, right? You've been in those systems, both cargo and otherwise. Susan,
Steve, do you mind if I just jump in on that one before you ask
Yeah,
me
go
another
ahead.
one? I think the other lesson we can learn from the 90s is that the Clinton administration's explicit policy on the internet was first do no harm. So it was the opposite of what you're seeing, what you're concerned about now. So instead of saying, what are the dangers that might happen and can we prevent it? It was first, this new technology offers wonderful opportunities.
this is a baby, don't harm it.
Yes, yes.
Which is
And I think
really
we
good,
saw-
but it gets me to the question I was going to ask you, which is how do you design a regulatory structure that protects public interest, but that doesn't throw the baby out with the bathwater, if you will. And I know, I want to remind people that you were the administrator of the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs. You probably dream about regulations, right?
I
Is
do.
that your kind? I figured
Sometimes
you did.
they're nightmares.
I met you for 2 minutes, and I just said, "This is my person." You dream about regulatory structures. So I'm interested in what our experience is with the kinds of regulation, how you shape regulation, so it is so that it kind of solves some of these problems. It just seems ridiculous that we're not bringing technology in faster to achieve better results. But how do you square that equation?
Well, my heart was beating very fast when Ian talked about we need to focus on outcomes. So don't set rigid rules of how you do things, like manual track inspection or 2 conductors per train. But let's see what's the safety outcome, what's the goal, and design regulations that way. And the iterative notion of what you were talking about, that we need to learn as we go along. So that could include pilots and sandboxes. But my understanding is now you need a waiver to use those automated track inspections. And that just shouldn't be the way we regulate.
Is there any industry that has that sort of encasing regulation along the lines you've talked about, which is essentially outcome driven as opposed to process driven?
Well, again, I'm going to show my age, but if you go back to how biotech was also first regulated, so this was before the Clinton internet experience, and the focus there was let's look at the risks that the product of this new technology might generate, rather than regulating based on the technology itself, and that really allowed the U.S. to our biotech innovations were far greater than other countries that were more precautionary and focused more on, gosh, this is a new technology, let's try to constrain it.
If you were to talk to Bruce Westerman, who's going to be here shortly, and Senator Fischer, who's in Nebraska, big rail state, and she's into this topic, what do you think they both need to promulgate when in the kind of rate? I mean, she's doing authorizations, as I understand it. Bruce is really engaged in the permitting reform questions, which are almost in every industry I talk to is around permitting reform. I'd like to know what you would suggest to them their North Star needs to be.
I'll just start quickly with permitting reform because I know less about it. But I would say that's something that, as you say, is important across sectors. And if we pull out individual sectors and try to reform it, there's always going to be some group that's concerned. Whereas if we say across the sector, we just need to be able to build things faster. And so let's see if we can have more people who can say yes and fewer people along the way who say no. Broadly on regulating in the rail sector, the rail regulations go back to the 1800s. So it's
Right.
probably one of the oldest set of regulations, statutes on the books. And it probably is time for revisions to that. And I think the recent Supreme Court decisions have not only constrained how agencies interpret their statutory language.
So this is Chevron,
and
Loper.
Yeah.
And what has that done to the mix?
So quickly, what Chevron did,
No, we know what they've done,
okay.
but have they made it
I think
easier, less easy to get
I
good
think-
regulation in this space?
I think it's made it harder for agencies to interpret longstanding statutes to mean something different than they originally
I see.
meant. And so I think it puts the onus on Congress and provides Congress an opportunity to draft new legislation that is less prescriptive, more outcome focused, as Ian said.
Great. Meet Matt Soule. Just meet Matt. Matt is a kind of person we rarely meet in Washington. You make things, like you really make things. We're in the kind of ideas and, we push paper and, digital emails and all this, but you're actually making things. Tell us about what you make, Matt. And I got to admit, you're in Los Angeles. You're about as far from Washington as you can get where you're based, and just sort of interested in that part of it too.
Yeah, so appreciate the opportunity. So let me talk to everyone a little bit about Parallel. So what Parallel is broadly doing is developing technology that is designed to increase rail's market share. And we're doing this because of all the public benefits that come with embracing a mode of transportation that is more energy efficient, it's cleaner. There's the public safety benefits of moving things by rail. Like every measurement we've seen is that rail is 10 times safer than on-road cars and trucks. So as a policy, we should be trying to drive as much freight to rail as possible, but also let's not forget the other benefit of reducing the cost of shipment for shippers and
But give the audience a picture, if you can, a graphic of the vehicle you create.
So we're solving for this market share problem, and so what we need better service quality, we need more consistency, more flexibility, and of course reducing the cost of getting things off the network. And so the answer is not a train, at least in our view. We are developing a vehicle that is self-contained. It has its powertrain on board, all the sensors, computers, radios, and it has much faster asset turn. We move together in platoons. We still respect the way railroads operate. We work alongside traditional freight trains, but we want to increase market share. Trucking is a 10 times
You're like the
bigger market.
Waymo of cargo
Exactly. It's
movement,
not a perfect analogy, but it's like it's a very good starting point to think about what we're doing. Is it's autonomous. By the way, it's battery electric, but our view is just get more things to rail to realize all those benefits.
And you I don't know if we're allowed to talk about this, but I was asking you where you manufacture and produce, but you were in Los Angeles now. You're
Yes.
thinking of maybe shifting. You're going to upgrade, kind of what you're doing. You don't have to tell us where, but what are the factors that go in? Because we're talking about the regulatory landscape right now. And I just have to admit, I'm just sort of thrilled to meet someone that's making something in this country that's tech enabled. You're putting it on rails, and it's made in America, which is kind of cool, unless you're really doing it in Canada and sneaking it down. I don't know, maybe Mexico, but but that's okay. I like North America, but I think the broad thing that I think is really interesting is you're doing this in this regulatory landscape right now. Are you
We're
thriving?
trying the best we can.
Are you thriving, or could you be thriving more?
We could be thriving more, absolutely.
And what would help you thrive more as a manufacturer of
I
these
think
new?
it's everything. What Ian's talking, what Susan's talking about. It's a performance-based approach to safety and focusing on the safety outcomes, the safety approach, the process to how we achieve these results, but not prescribing technology inputs, and that's been the biggest issue that we've been working to overcome.
We just talked to Ian about this cargo theft issue. How do you deal with that?
We're not there yet, but we have a lot of strategies around that, and really they will not be proven until we're out in the general rail system or doing it. But like one of our starting points is keep moving. Like when this theft happens, it's when people will intentionally sabotage things, or just the inherent nature of these rail operations requires the equipment to stop, and that's a great opportunity for someone to jump on board. The telemetry, the instrumentation, the sensors we have also gives a lot of insight, but the flexibility of the platform also allows us to be responsive to things that might be happening out there that we're observing with these sensors. And we kind of did this by accident, but to further improve upon rail's energy efficiency, we've reduced the gap between our vehicles. And someone from the rail industry was out looking at our vehicles, and they're like, hey, by the way, it's harder to open the doors now. So we've kind of like pushed the threshold up for someone to actually break in. Now they're going to get like a acetylene torch and like cut a hole in the side of the box rather than just cut the lock.
You know, I really like doing these programs with Ted Greener, who's at AAR, and Ian Jefferies, because it kind of gets me back into, you know, the rail world. My great uncle was a conductor on the Santa Fe Railroad. I've got his conductor stuff hanging in my home, and it's, you know, his, you know, the thing was on his hat. I mean, tickets, and it just really brings me back. But there's so much about this topic that as a layperson, I just don't know. For instance, I don't know who's responsible for the tracks. Are the track? So I often do things on the electric grid in the country, and what needs to do to, you know, what we need to do by way of infrastructure investment in the grid. There's also lots of coordination. It's also uneven around the country, and I'm interested in that kind of question too. As you're sort of bringing on a new product, putting it on the rails, how good is that system? I should have asked this to Ian. You know, is it something that needs attention in terms of looking at that infrastructure across the United States, investment and consistency, if you will?
Our view is that this is not a barrier for us. Like, absolutely, more investment in that will benefit us. It's really, you know, the most essential investment in infrastructure for us is charging infrastructure, just how we've set up this technology. But, you know, the benefits would be increasing the class of tracks so they're faster, right, electrifying more switches. These are benefits that would improve the asset efficiency for us.
Well, we set this up as a consulting opportunity with you for free, with Susan and with Rob. Rob, what advice would you give to an entrepreneur, an innovator who's created a new product that was going to be injected in the system, from your experience of new entrants that are coming in, you know, driven by technology advancement and opportunity? What could get in the way that he could, you know, proactively kind of begin work? What is your advice and counsel to him?
Move to Singapore.
I know you're serious. No, but if he's not going to move to Singapore,
I'm not serious. But I'm serious in the following sense: when you meet Singaporean government officials, number one, they're the smartest people you've ever met, and number two, they're laser focused on this. The entire government is focused on how do we boost innovation and productivity and make our country richer and a technology leader. Our leaders are not focused on that. They're focused on a variety of other things. But that's not the thing they're focused on. So my advice to you, and I mean, you know your business a million times more than I do and all, but what I've seen over the years is entrepreneurs who come up with great ideas, and then they like, why don't Washington understand this? Because A, Washington's got a million things on their plate. B, there's sort of a bias against newness. So I think that doing exactly what you're doing, being here, telling your story, getting in front of decision makers and explaining why what you're doing is going to be important for the country. That's so important. You know, there's a few Silicon Valley VCs now that have increased their presence.
So he should meet some members of Congress and stuff.
Yeah, like one maybe.
You know Bruce Westerman? We're setting you up, Bruce. Don't worry. Okay.
So I think, but I think the other challenge, I think, is there should be more sort of government relations rep in DC for startup-y kinds of companies, and that's growing. But you know, the bigger companies, they have the capacity to do this, as they should. But it's harder for the smaller, new startup-y companies to kind of tell their story, and then oftentimes the regulatory barriers are worse for them. So I see that, for example, in people who want to do 3D printed housing. how many counties, how many building codes. So it's just hard to deal with that stuff. So being here is step number one.
Just so Congressman Westerman knows, I'm going to talk to him in a minute. He's what Parallel is doing is they're creating autonomous battery electric rail vehicles, which they're putting on the system. He's in LA now. He's going to move. He's I think maybe interested in Arkansas. Who knows? But I think what's interesting, we've been sort of talking about modernization, in our systems and what we need to do it. And you're like a real talent. So Susan, what's your advice to Matt?
I'm not sure I have good advice too, but I think getting your message out and maybe trying some things like Waymo and Uber did. Just start small and don't ask for permission.
Don't ask for permission.
I need the railroads to get permission.
Well, with that, we have the congressman that has arrived. Let's give a big round of applause to Susan Dudley from George Washington University, Matt Soule, who's the founder and CEO of Parallel, and Robert Atkinson, who's the founder and president of the Information Technology Innovation Foundation. Thank you so much for joining us and joining the Steve Clemens Show here this morning at AAR. Now welcome to the stage our next guest. I wish we had welcoming music as you came up. Great to see you, Bruce. Thank you so much. Have a seat. We've been talking about you a lot this morning. And I've been sort of saying, hey, what do you, I talked to Ian Jefferies. What do you most want out of Bruce Westerman? And they're all saying, well, he's the keeper of permit reform and all sorts of authorizations. But so folks know, Bruce is congressman from Arkansas. He's very, very involved in transportation issues and questions. And so let me just start out and say, what's highest on your radar screen right now?
Permitting reform.
And tell us why.
Because it affects everything from infrastructure and transportation to energy, to meeting the demands that we have in our country right now. We have to have permitting and regulatory reform if we're going to meet the challenges that are in front of us.
Now, you are on the House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure. What's the literacy level of your colleagues, and you're both around this broad question? I mean, you're talking about permitting reform, and we've been talking about how we're stuck in regulatory structures that were fashioned 50 years ago, 60 years ago, even longer than that. And I'm just, I'm always interested in the question. We can always find a member of Congress like yourself who wants to say, hey, we need to be more enlightened, we need to do this and this. But it's hard to get a sense of the decibel level of urgency. And how urgent is this, do you feel, among your colleagues?
And this has to be bipartisan because it has to get 20 votes in the Senate. And I'm seeing more urgency for it now than I've ever seen. We made a run at it about this time last year with Senator Manchin and Barrasso. And we never could get across the finish line, but the work on it hasn't stopped and the urgency for it hasn't stopped. One of the things that's probably driving more people to think about it now than ever before is the advent of the data centers and AI technology. The tremendous amount of energy that those facilities use, and the realization that we are really behind where we need to be in having the infrastructure and the energy capacity to power those data centers. And we're not just a little bit behind. There's a data center that's planned for North Louisiana that will actually take some power out of Arkansas, that it needs 3 gigabytes of energy. To put that in perspective, I've got some nuclear power plants in my district. Each one of those plants is a gigabyte. So you need 3 nuclear power plants to run 1 data center. That's the kind of energy demand that we're seeing, and the increases for electricity and the projection for that are astronomical. And this is coming at a time where we've shut down a lot of coal plants, we're building gas plants, but we can't get the infrastructure and the energy supplies fast enough to meet the demand for these data centers.
So in permitting reform, I was very familiar with what Joe Manchin and John Barrasso were trying to push forward in this. And of course, you had different sides. I mean, sometimes you have permitting questions and challenges for legitimate issues on environment, legitimate issues on the other side. How do you best get that equilibrium right? And I'll give you an example. Recently, I was in, where were we, Naharka? We were down in Dallas, and we did a big thing with Encore Energy, the biggest utility energy supplier in the state. And I think we had Siemens and NVIDIA and Dell looking at this. And this guy from Encore said Texas is going to dominate this industry on data centers in the future because it only takes us 6 months to get permits through. And so we're faster than anywhere else in the country. So he framed it in terms of permitting. But I'm interested in the other side of the debate. How do you think you got to get the equilibrium right of interests?
So everybody has to realize what's at stake. So it's an educational exercise, which I need y'all's help with that. We need every stakeholder in the country should be here in D.C. Making the case for permitting reform on both sides of the aisle. Energy gets a lot of the focus because of the demands for AI and data centers. But McKinsey Group put out a study in July, y'all may have seen this, that it analyzed projects that were delayed in the NEPA process over a 4-year window. And as you know, it takes an average of 4.7 years to get a NEPA permit right now. So they looked at public infrastructure projects held up in a 4-year window, and the price tag they put on that to the American taxpayer was $2.7 trillion. That's public infrastructure. Throw on top of that all the energy and the transmission, put in mining, which is a whole issue in itself because of our dependence on foreign countries.
It's 20 years for a mine.
Yeah, you're talking decades in getting a permit for mining. The average public infrastructure project's over 6 years. All NEPA combined is 4.7. There's some data saying it's dropped down to 4.2. But there was a great piece written by George Will last week talking about a book that I've ordered the book. I'm looking forward to reading a guy named Philip Howard. It's called Saving America's Can Do. And when we're talking about innovation, look at all the great things our country has done. I was giving a speech back in Arkansas earlier this week, and I like to refer to this quote that's in the House chamber. It's the only quote in the House chamber. It says, "Let us develop the resources of our land, call forth its powers, build up its institutions, promote all its great ideas, and see whether or not we too in our day and generation can do something worthy to be remembered." Think about the great ideas that this country has had. I mean, we invented the hamburger, the light bulb, telegraph, radio, TV, computer, the internet,
Fantastic railway
GPS,
system.
railway systems. Yeah. And it's because people have been able to innovate, but we're destroying the fabric of what made our country great by putting this wet blanket of regulatory and permitting. And my chief, y'all may know Nancy Peel. If you do, you'll understand this. But one of her favorite sayings is, "Are you an American or an American?" And we're becoming Americans because we can't innovate and we can't bring these new ideas to the table. We still outperform the rest of the world and everything, but we can't think we're going to keep tying our hands behind our back and putting our feet in concrete and thinking we're going to beat the rest of the world.
Bruce, you're pushing the SPEED Act. That's what your legislation called the SPEED Act. I'm really interested in the transportation dimensions of that because we've been talking this morning about a national transportation system that kind of wants to absorb technology, take advantage of many of the new technologies that come forward to be better in this, and they're dealing with it's kind of like, the difference, in my book between a medieval age in the 70s or 60s and a Renaissance, but I'm interested in what the SPEED Act would do to bring the Enlightenment forward in transportation.
Well, it makes NEPA work as a process. Speaking of rail, there was a very important decision that came out of Utah and the 7 counties decision that involved a railroad where the Supreme Court said NEPA can't dictate outcomes. NEPA is a process that's used to analyze the underlying environmental statutes. That's what it's supposed to be. It's grown into its own animal. The engineer in me thinks of NEPA, and I see a flow chart when I think of NEPA. Easy routes, a categorical exclusion. Then you go to an environmental assessment, and the world can go crazy from there if you hit an environmental impact statement. But even if you make it through the current really messed up maze of NEPA and you get your record of decision, there's 6 years after you start construction on a project where somebody can file a suit in an Article 3 court, get an injunction, and shut your project down. That's happening all over the country right now. That throws a a massive hindrance on investors' attitude towards wanting to build things here in the country when you've got capital that you need to spend to get a return on it, and you're in the back of your mind, you're thinking, I'm going to spend 4 years or longer to get a permit. Then when I get the permit and I actually start spending real money, this project can still be shut down. It's asinine to think that we've let a system like that come into play, and that we, as my friend Scott Peters, who's working with me on permitting reform, says, Moses didn't write NEPA on stone tablets. It's something we can.
Is that a Scott Peters line?
It is, yeah. I'll credit him.
And for those
with
who
that.
don't know, Scott's from San Diego, and so he's down near our friend Matt. We're in Southern California, and Southern California is very interesting because it's a place with a quality of life, but regulation, but they care a lot, Ian, about their rails. I mean, tons about their rails. So in the broad side of this with permitting, I'm interested in the others around this, like than Scott Peters. I remember during the Manchin Barrasso effort, even some surprising voices like Ro Khanna was supportive of some elements of permitting reform. How deep is the bipartisanship around this issue? And if it is deep, why can't it move at the speed of speed?
Yeah. And I think it is moving. So Jared Golden from Maine is the Democrat Maine co-sponsor. He's on the Natural Resources Committee, which we have jurisdiction over NEPA. And as we add a Democrat, we're adding more Republicans. The problem's not going to be getting Republican votes on NEPA reform or on the SPEED Act. The problem's going to be getting 60 votes in the Senate. To get 60 votes in the Senate, we need as many Democrats in the House on board. So I could write a red meat permitting reform bill that I would think is perfect, that I could get passed out of the House, that probably never would go anywhere in the Senate. The perfect permitting reform bill is the one that gets to the president's desk and he signs it. So we've got to be open to working across the aisle, or we're not going to get permitting reform done. And my approach to it has been that permitting should be a blind process. And when I say a blind process, it shouldn't pick winners and losers based on technology or industry. It should just simply be a process that people can go through the process, check all the boxes, make sure they've got the environmental safeguards in place. And I'll challenge you to find somebody that's a bigger conservationist in Congress than I am. My graduate degree is in forestry. I think I understand environmentalism and conservation. We're doing more harm to the environment by not permitting projects than we are by holding them up and creating this morass. If we want to do something good for the environment and good for the economy, we'll do permitting reform so that we can innovate and make cleaner, safer, healthier forms of transportation, of energy, and of all the great things that we do in our country that, again, are being held up because we can't get through the paperwork and the red tape.
One of the things I asked Ian Jefferies to do up here was to sort of paint a picture of what could be in rail and transport as you brought technology in. And I kind of just listening to you in this, thinking about data centers, AI coming on, all of this, you imagine, trying to paint a picture of what the future of mobility in all of its forms could look like 20 years from now is a pretty neat thing if you kind of, have this Disney-esque, look of this. And I always wonder what is keeping us from getting to that picture, or what might keep us from getting there. And I'm just interested, Congressman, in the people you're listening to and talking to, interfacing with. Is that picture clear of what the opportunities are in the future? Or are we kind of trapped in an incrementalism that doesn't have much vision?
I think one of the problems in DC is we don't have long-term visions. I joke, my undergraduate's engineering, where we were taught to think with logic and reason, and then I studied forestry, where you look at long-term horizons, and I say those are the worst two educational backgrounds you can have to serve in Congress, because neither of those things are appreciated. But we've got to look at a long-term horizon on where are we going to be in the future and how do we get there. And and when do we get there? Because things are changing at a very rapid pace, and we've got to have policies that align with the ability of our economy to react fast and to build things and to bring those new technologies into place. And
part of this is, it's interesting. There are lots of different transportation. There are bicycles. My friend Alan Greenberg is here. He works for the Department of Transportation. Apparently, he is not working. He is still working down the road. But Alan, I want to come over to you because this is the guy in Washington, D.C., whether you like them or not, who created all the bike lanes. I mean, he transformed mobility in this city with the bike lanes. And when he first started it, I thought he would never. That's not Alan. Alan is a little bit further. But Alan, I want to give you an opportunity to pose a question. And also, as we kind of think, no, further back. Alan, smile at Sammy. There we go.
So,
and it's great to have you here, Alan, and any other Department of Transportation people here.
The first thing I should say is I'm not speaking on behalf of the Department of Transportation. But I think one of the tensions in this space, and I'd be curious if you could. So a lot of innovations across the board have been troubled by overuse of some regulations. Bike lanes, for instance, and facility improvements in San Francisco were delayed for many, many years because of CEQA, the California version of NEPA. But I think one of the tensions one always hears is how do we make sure the process can work on things that are not good, things that really do have extremely negative impacts, while at the same time moving forward quickly things that are good. And maybe your bill contemplates some of that.
Yeah, we don't want to make it easier to destroy the environment. We want to have the same rigorous standards. We're not talking about changes to the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, to FERC or ESA or Marine Mammal Protection or the Historic Preservation Act. Now, that's not in speed right now. There are some things that need to be changed in those laws as well. But what we want is a process that evaluates the statutes in those underlying environmental regulations and does it quickly. The answer may be no, but that's a better answer than maybe. And that's what we keep giving investors is, well, maybe you can do this. Just keep spending money and studying it more, and let's go to another agency and get them to check off. Coming from the private sector, it was always better to get yes or no, and then you can move on and go from there. You may not like no, and you may want to challenge it in court, but at least get to yes or no more quickly. But don't water down the standards that you've got to meet.
One of the things Bruce, thank you so much for joining us this morning. But one of the things I found interesting about Alan's world, because you were basically saying, hey, bike lanes were a victim of a lot of this as well. But I'm also interested in the other side because I know that world, and we kind of talk about the whole totality of mobility, which is part of what we're doing today, not just railways, is that you brought data, you brought design and advanced thinking. I remember talking to Rahm Emanuel, he was mayor of Chicago, saying, hey, we learned something from data from FedEx trucks on how our trucks, they saved a lot of money, which he then helped transfer that money to schools. So data, bringing advanced methodologies and AI to these various things. And what I find interesting about the conversation today is there are some modes of transportation that are not allowed to bring what they're learning into that system, right? That's part of what they're doing. So I'd be interested as they're telling their story, Bruce, and you're engaged in the SPEED Act and pushing. What would you like to see those folks in the transportation, writ large, do to help move this agenda forward?
That's a great question, and I think everybody's got different stories that they can tell. The main thing is to tell the story, and to come here to DC. I'm always here recently. I like to tell about the.
Do you ever get to go home?
I live on an airplane, I think, but the Sandstone and Gravel Association came here 2 weeks ago, and they were in my office, and they said, Congressman, we've got 300 people on the Hill today. We're going to every Senate office and every House office, and the SPEED Act is our number one priority.
Wow.
if we can build if everybody realizes they're in the coalition,
Right.
how many people that are affected by permitting and regulatory issues, and get all those groups activated and come here and tell about how, look, we had this data, we showed this was actually going to be good for the environment, and we couldn't do the project because it got held up in CEQA in this instance. And I will say California is the only state I travel to where people say, will you please regulate us? Saying, will the federal government please step in and regulate California so that we can get out from under the state regulations? Most states are saying, help us get out from under the burden of the federal regulations. But everybody across the country's got a story about how permitting has delayed a project. And in most instances, you can show how this project would have been better for the environment. I'm very passionate about forestry. That's an area where we're putting more carbon in the atmosphere through poor choices on forest management. We're burning up iconic trees like the giant sequoias, which they're only found in about 70 groves in California, because we can't go in and apply the science that we know works to make forests healthy because of NEPA regulations. And
Do you ever go to
burdensome
Nebraska?
process. Yeah, the home of.
When's the last time you were there?
I almost went for the college baseball World Series, but my
Well, I've got
Razorbacks
somebody who
beat.
can help with the next trip.
Yeah.
Let's walk. So first of all, let's thank Congressman Bruce Westerman for joining us today. And let me introduce you to Senator Deb Fischer. Senator Fischer, come on up from Nebraska. Great to see you. What's that?
That's what the setup was for. I love Nebraska.
I just love how you. I just love how you froze on that. You know. Hey, how are you, Senator? Good to see you. Good to see you. Thank you. Everyone, we have Senator Deb Fischer here, of course, Senator of Nebraska. And let me just tell you, I mean, if this is right, and I know the senator well, so Deb, you're on the Armed Services Committee, the Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee, which is completely relevant for today, Agriculture, Nutrition, and Forestry, as well as Rules and Administration and Appropriations. Are you leaving anything for your colleagues to do? That's a lot of committees.
I try to handle it all.
Well, it's great. It's really great to have you here. One of the things that you are responsible for is the Surface Transportation Reauthorization Bill, and we're discussing basically how do we revision and rewire a future around mobility and transportation in all of its form. We have the Association of American Railroads supporting today's program, but it's not just about railroads. But how do we get the equities right for America in rethinking and revisioning something that embraces technology where it helps, that gets the public interest right? What's on your radar screen?
You know, first of all, you have to figure out what goals you want to have in the use of all that really cool technology that's out there. And the goals I look at for innovation are always, how are we going to move people and goods faster, more effectively, and more safely? You know, and that's using technology, whether it's automation or AI or integrated work that we can do there, and even looking at different fuels for the future as well that are going to be able to drive that. And then, what's government's role? What's federal government's role? I won't address California and the sequoias, but I agree with your previous speaker. But what's government's role going to be there? And in Nebraska, I think we use a lot of common sense. We want to make sure that government regulations aren't more burdensome. We want to make sure that there are good choices made so that we can move more quickly. For example, NEPA, you were addressing that earlier. What would it look like if we didn't really require a NEPA process for programs that were $10 million or less? You know, think of how we could move those projects along. And then we're spending taxpayer dollars more wisely when we can move faster. You know, that's definitely a plus. Just think outside the box a little bit to be able to do that, but also know what your goals are. When I look at reauthorization, obviously, my number one goal is the Highway Trust Fund. to be able to make sure that we can continue to make those investments in the infrastructure, roads, bridges. That's my background. My dad was a civil engineer. He worked for the Department of Roads his whole career. He was the state engineer director for a couple governors. And so I grew up going on inspection tours on Sunday drives, and we'd be lined up by bridge abutments and things like that. We look like orphans, my two older brothers and I, in every family picture because we're lined up at construction sites. But through osmosis, I think I really gained such an appreciation for the investments in the future that are made when you invest in infrastructure.
So how do you fix the problem? I remember when I worked for Senator Bingham and we had New Mexico, one of the biggest news hits we would get each year was the distribution of the Highway Trust Fund money. And there was one year where there was a calculation error in the 5th year or something like this. And I found the error. We got the Clinton administration to restore the money. We had Roswell, New Mexico, really conservative, thanking Jeff Bingham, and in 3 inch, thank you, Senator Bingham, for saving it's a tiny amount of money when you look at the whole side, but it's really a big deal. And my understanding is that trust fund account is not being replenished because we have a lot of EVs and the fuel taxes aren't driving it. So again, this is another area, just to come back to what I was discussing with Ian Jefferies, where kind of the different way we are doing things, technology is driving different circumstances that need to be absorbed. So how do you deal with that?
The Highway Trust Fund, the formula that's used, that basically is going to come down to who the donors are and who are the recipients in it. So I believe it's going to be hard to make any kind of change in that distribution formula. So instead,
But how about the inputs?
Yeah, but instead we need to look at how do we increase revenue to the Highway Trust Fund so we're not dependent upon general fund transfers, because the fund's going to be insolvent, I think, in 2028. So how are we going to be able to do that? At the state level, I chaired in the Nebraska Unicameral, I chaired the Transportation Telecommunications Committee. And I introduced a bill that was passed where we added another trust fund, the Build Nebraska Trust Fund, and we took a quarter cent of sales tax right off the top and put it in this fund for 20 years of building new roads to manage lane capacity and things like that. At the federal level, obviously, we have to look at how do we expand that user fee. I'm a huge supporter of a user fee. And EVs don't pay anything at the federal level. Some states have implemented fees, but at the federal level, they don't pay into their use of our roads and bridges that we have here in the United States. So I have a bill, the Fair Share Act, that would address that. And I know some of my colleagues, Bernie Moreno's also interested in doing that. We talk about it. Hopefully we can get something in reauthorization so that we do tap in to highway users. And it's to be able to keep that a user fee and pay your fair share.
Now I don't think this would be a surprise. You have a big ranch, or maybe a small ranch. I don't know how big is your ranch?
It's about a regular size ranch for our neighborhood.
Right. Okay. So I assume you use trucking and rails and whatnot for your ranch, right?
We have truckers when we're sending our steers to market,
right?
Things like that. Yeah, you have to have cattle trucks.
And you got big rail in Nebraska. I'm just interested. You sort of look at this world as we're kind of looking, forward. One of the things that's come up repeatedly in earlier panels, but also my discussion with Ian Jefferies, is that there are different kinds of legislation, or different kinds of regulation. One is sort of looking at outcomes and figuring out, okay, you have freedom to mix and freedom to kind of get to whatever, but you have an outcome that you've got to be responsible for, and that's the regulatory hook, versus process where you're regulated in terms of looking at tracks, et cetera. I'm interested, does that kind of discussion come into something like an authorization act, where you're able to, look at the kind of regulation that might be more innovation friendly than not?
Well, I think it has to. And when you mentioned trucks, you mentioned rail, obviously.
And apparently they like each other now because of Ian Jefferies. Just that was, part of the conversation.
Ian can tell you my comment is always, which I used at the state level too, but my comment is always, I want my truckers and I want my railroads to get along, so don't ever make me choose who I love best. So
Well, he made that clear today. Here, they're all
that's
cool.
Good.
Yeah,
Nice job. But you need to understand that we're all integrated in this, and that's why obviously we have to look at freight and how the involvement is there, and our class ones pay for their rails. I try to help our short lines and things with grants, and because it's an important part of our entire system, as is the trucking. But the roads do the last mile of delivery from our great rail system we have in this country. And so we have to make sure that we have those investments in our roads as well to take care of that last mile. I mean, there's ways we can help on that with FMCSA, for example. Have them have the ability to levy penalties again, to be able to focus and to be able to hold these businesses accountable. So there's other ways you can look at it.
Senator,
but to look overall to your question and overall guidance, I guess.
Right.
It's hard. It's hard in, I think, a country of our size, for one thing. The diversity we see across states and in states, within states as well, to be able to meet all those needs. And that's why we tend, as elected officials, to look at our own states, to look at our own districts, and it's more difficult to find a policy that would be overarching of the entire country.
When you think about the future that's rushing towards us of automation, robotics, AI, smart cities, smart rural areas, a kind of much denser connectivity of everything in this space, what's your North Star when it comes to transportation? I'm really interested in whether or not you see stuff coming down the pike that would be really cool for the country if we only got it right. I just don't know if that's the way transportation bills are designed, around the cool next thing, or whether we are just saving and incrementally keeping all the old things.
Well, we have to maintain, that's a big part of it, and then you have to continually keep up with capacity challenges. So I think that's a rut. Maybe it's a okay rut, but it's still a rut.
Meaning that we don't have enough capacity?
We don't have enough capacity. I mean, that's why you have to increase lanes, or you have elevated freeways, whatever, so you can handle all the traffic that's out there. The way we can help with that is by encouraging innovation. And again, going back to, we can encourage innovation by our industry to not penalize them, but encourage them to take risks, to look ahead, to find a leader within government to be able to take on whatever that may be and be their champion for that, to push it ahead. But then you have to have government not throw up roadblocks, not hinder the development, but instead to incentivize it, to encourage it. And I think a lot of times the grants we have in the Department of Transportation are obviously for more building, when maybe they should be for more experimental projects out there. or at least not to hinder them.
You know, we're getting near the end of our time, but I just want to, you know, first of all, I love your work. I love the work you do in national security. We've had the pleasure of hanging out a lot. I'm interested in what the Deb Fischer mark on transportation is going to be. Like, what do you want? What's the legacy you want to leave of having changed one big thing? What would that be?
It would be that we need to rethink how we view transportation. And we need to view it always, my whole life, I've done this. We have to view it as an investment in the future. It is an investment in this country. It is an investment for our children, our grandchildren, for future generations. You know, I remember my dad taking me out as he's planning some of the interstate system in Nebraska. And we went west of Lincoln. We're standing in a field as where the interstate's coming in. And he wanted people out in Seward County as they're headed into Lincoln to be able to see our Capitol building, which is a wonderful building. It's a Art Deco structure, tower on the plains. And to have that view coming in Lincoln made a huge impression on me.
That's fantastic. I'm going to give Ian Jefferies a chance to ask one question before we close up. Ian, do you have a question for the senator?
Well, first of all, thanks for being here. Thanks for your leadership across the board for so many years, not only to our industry, but to the entire supply chain. So in keeping with the reauth theme, you know, one of the things we talked about is how do you create a structure that, to your point, encourages innovation and testing and pilot programs in a kind of a safe environment that allows you to build the data that demonstrates you've got a new, better way to do something, and then be allowed to roll that into meeting the regulatory requirement. It's a big lift, but do you think that the statute and a reauth can be helpful in driving DOT, for example, to create that sort of model?
I think we can look at pilot projects without the fear that then the government's going to make them mandatory. You know, to unleash that creativity where entrepreneurs and innovators can come up with ideas that would not then threaten railroads, that would not threaten car makers, that the government's going to then mandate that they have to apply what a pilot project is developed to, I think, encourage that new development, those new ideas. And if those ideas can make it in a free market system without a government mandate, without more regulations, I think that takes away some of the fear of innovation for the future.
I always joke with Senator Fischer. I mean, I have really enjoyed getting to know the senator, but the reason we first bonded is she almost made me faint at a party for one of her staff members when she was describing in great detail how you birth a cow.
No, you don't birth a cow.
What do you do?
It's called calving.
Calving. Let me just tell you, calving does not even come close to capturing the drama of that.
Steve just about passed out, and so I embellished quite a bit.
So I just want to thank, she's a great friend, and I really appreciate your thoughtful approach on many of these issues. We wish you luck on this legislation. And Senator Deb Fischer, thank you so much for joining us today. And that is a wrap now. I want to thank Ian Jefferies and his team at the Association for American Railroads. I think this has been a deep dive into these issues and really appreciate all of you joining us. We've got a lot of stuff here, coffee, rolls, hang out, meet people you didn't know. And it's a great pleasure to have you all. So I hope you'll come back again. Thank you very much for joining us.